necessary to save the planet, human beings learning to respect Mother Earth and to resist greedy oil companies. Volunteering here for 5 years. I love Solarfest. I think it's a great sort of community space of working hard on what's most important, which is saving the Earth. And thank you all for coming out, and let's hope we all call our friends and get more people to come. So I just watched Gasland 2 twice this week. Hydrofracking is basically changes the story of what we're in. They're wrecking the water supply of this country right now. We're in an era of what's called extreme energy, where the power of the big boys with their toys and their exploding dynamite has gotten so strong now that they're blowing up the shale bed underneath the United States and all over the world, and it's causing the water to get ruined. So we really have to start a resistance movement against oil companies and irresponsible capitalism and all that stuff. So it's okay to have a green lifestyle and be organic and bike, but that is no substitute for resisting corporations and the takeover of our government. It has to stop. What's happening in DC cannot go on for very long and have us have a livable future. So I really encourage everybody to just stop accepting the unacceptable. America is not supposed to be this way. We're not supposed to have our government bought off by oil companies. It's just not right. And we have to make a movement that changes the world. We are not on track now to heading towards a livable future. If you kind of plan out 50 years in your mind about where we're going as a society, it's really not there. And I think that should be unacceptable to us. We as a species have a right to survive. We have a right to demand a livable future. That's some language that's coming out of Peaceful Uprising and Tim DeChristopher's out in Utah. Demand a livable future. We have a right to that. So hopefully that's what we'll work together to build this weekend, a movement that saves the Earth. And thank you, everybody. That's about all I have.
Divestment is a strategy that's been used in the past. Probably most recently, the one that many of us are aware of is with South African apartheid. And divestment is a movement where institutions, universities, hospitals, faith organizations all choose to divest. That means take their funds out of investments that might be held back in the 80s by businesses that were operating in apartheid Africa. Well, now how we're using this divestment strategy for the climate movement is to divest from the top 200 companies that are the fossil fuel companies. Right? These are the companies like Exxon. So, and I'll go through the math I have an engineering background, so I hope I don't bore you with the math, but there's some really important math that Bill McKibben has been talking about lately. And that is that there are kind of three numbers to talk about. One is that we can't have, internationally, we've agreed that we can't have more than 2 degrees Celsius warming. Right? So that's kind of the threshold of catastrophic climate change. Already we're close to 1 degree Celsius of change. And we're feeling that, right? These torrential rains, the crazy hurricanes, all the extreme weather, the fires, the droughts. So 2 degrees. And the international community has stood up and said, no, we have to do what we have to do to keep it at 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the scientists can tell us how much we can still burn to get us up to that point, burn of fossil fuels. And that's about 500 or so, 500, 600 gigatons of carbon, right, to get to that 2 degrees Celsius. So then the third number is where we get into trouble, because the third number is how much burnable carbon are in the reserves of those fossil fuel corporations. They have 5 times that amount of carbon. They have 2,700 something gigatons of burnable fossil fuels that would create carbon dioxide, way above the 2 degrees Celsius mark. And not only do they have those reserves are still underground, many of them, luckily, but they are on their books. So these companies claim these reserves as their own. Okay. So those, you can think of those reserves of fossil fuels are circulating in our economy in some sense, the dollar values of them. So the divestment idea is that we want to pull any investments out of these fossil fuel corporations and move them into a much more healthy, resilient, renewables, localized economies, that sort of a movement, so that we keep these fossil fuels in the ground. So if you want to learn more about divestment, I don't want to go on too long, but if you do want to learn more about divestment, it's a movement that is taking off wildfire on college campuses. There are about 350 college campuses across the U.S. that have campaigns that are trying to get their universities to divest from fossil fuels. So it's a really exciting movement.
Oh no!
I wish you luck!
You want to hear one more?
I wish you luck!
If you want to hear one more, let me hear it say, Scatterlights is number 1! One more time! Now you're going to get this big one.
let other people who maybe aren't as like talkative or feel as comfortable sharing in the group, stepping back so that other people feel like more comfortable engaging in the conversation. Another one that I like a lot is just acknowledging that oppression exists, and this sometimes can be like weird and abstract, but like there are systems of power in our society that operate in like big institutional levels, and there are also systems of power that operate in our personal interactions with each other. And some of those systems of power are sexism and racism and ableism and ageism. One of the purposes of just acknowledging those things is that if it comes up, if those dynamics are playing out in the way that we're relating to each other in this conversation, we can collectively together take a look back at the agreements and say, hey, we're not here to argue over whether or not oppression exists. We agreed in the beginning of this. And so as facilitators, I think it's helpful, for me at least, to have like a group acknowledgement of the agreement, so that if there is something we need to pause and to like, if the discussion is getting mired down in like an argument over whether or not oppression exists, or like if like one person is taking up too much time, it's like as facilitators and as everyone here, we can be like, oh hey, I think that like in the beginning of this conversation we made this agreement, so maybe we can like move on to it, like, and move through this conversation and not keep like engaging with it. So some of them are less active and others are more active, but I think that's what I found helpful in my experience.
Well, yeah, and that's helpful for me. We're not here to argue. We're here to build consensus and like generate knowledge and share.
Yeah, so that you can just express that feeling, and so that we can all hold, be careful with each other and be gentle with each other, I guess. And then another one is, if something's confusing, feel free to interrupt and be like, yo, what was that acronym you just used? Like, you just said 4 acronyms in a row and I don't know what any of those things are. Like, so like try not to interrupt each other, but if you're feeling confused about what like words or like acronyms people were saying.
So our definition of what a false solution is basically any proposed solution to the climate crisis that, while trying to fix one aspect of the problem, is at the same time creating a whole new set of ecological problems, or reinforcing existing social systems that are a part of the problem, and social inequities and injustices. And so when we're talking about the Vermont gas pipeline, basically it's a gas pipeline that brings fracked gas from the Northwest Territories and Alberta into Vermont. And it would be a 43-mile pipeline that the first phase is going from north of Burlington and Colchester down to Middlebury. And then the second phase of the project would go from Middlebury underneath Lake Champlain over to Ticonderoga, New York, to serve the International Paper plants. And then later phases of the project would connect this pipeline up with the United States transmission grids, like these pipelines that you're talking about that they're trying to build through New York State, so that Vermont would kind of become this pass-through for gas that's being fracked in the Marcellus Shale region, to eventually be able to go in the opposite, in either direction. So right now the first phase of the project is in the regulatory permitting stages. It's there's a proposal before the Public Service Board, which is the decision-making body in Vermont that regulates, that has to give a certificate of public good to allow this project to start. And the second phase of the project is expected that they'll apply for the permits for that in the coming months. And so when we look at this as a false solution, one of the main reasons is because it's building out new fossil fuel infrastructure. Like natural gas is still a fossil fuel. It still has greenhouse gas emissions that some argue are higher than coal. The industry has done a really good job of greenwashing this, but it still is a fossil fuel, and we're still building out new infrastructure that locks us into fossil fuel consumption for the next 50 years.
Wouldn't last that long,
And so that's one reason why we consider it to be a false solution. Another is because of fracking and the extraction process. Like fracking right now is happening up in Alberta, in the Northwest Territories. Those are places where there's unceded Indigenous territory. There's like a lot of like low-income folks, and also in the fracking areas in New York and Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale area. There's a whole lot of like environmental racism and classism that happens in the extraction areas, and these communities are like disproportionately impacted by the extraction of natural gas and fracked gas. And then the ecological impacts of fracking alongside of that. Are people familiar generally when I say fracking with what that means? I'm gonna give like a quick fracking for gas. Yeah, fracking also gas.
There's Gasland 2 now.
There's now Gasland 2. It's on tour. Check it out. Basically it's like this, a new way of extracting gas from the earth, where there's a huge amount of water and chemicals is like shot down some crazy tube, creates cracks in the rock, and then gas is allowed to escape that otherwise would not be accessible to extract.
Yeah, it makes it a mini earthquake. Like all the chemicals kind of
they
explode.
Split the rocks apart. Yeah.
Well, the gas companies will tell you they've been doing it for 50, 60 years. They've done some vertical wells with just water, but now they're going a mile down and then 2 miles sideways, and or more, at least 2 miles, and then they're using about 500 chemicals, all of which is exempt from disclosure thanks to the Halliburton loophole pushed through by Cheney in 2005. And it's causing earthquakes. And the reason they say that it is as bad or worse than coal is because the amount of energy to do that, and the thousands of diesel truckloads per well, not to even mention the methane that escapes, which is something like 100 times or more the greenhouse gas of CO2. So it is as bad or worse than mountaintop coal removal.
So another reason that we consider this to be a false solution is because of some of the corporate ownership structures that we see. Vermont Gas is owned by, I'm going to mess this up, is owned by Gas Metro, which is a Canadian company that also owns Green Mountain Power, and it also owns the Velco, the Vermont Electric Company. And Gas Metro is owned by Enbridge, which is the majority share is owned by Enbridge. And Enbridge is like this huge, oil and gas mega company, Canadian company, that is also the same company that's trying their darndest to get a pipeline to move tar sands out to the East Coast. So when we look at solutions to the climate crisis, we don't see that they can include like these same corporate money-making systems. So like the people that are creating the problem in the first place, that are these like corporate interests, are not going to come up with a solution. They're just coming up with a new way to like pump out as much money and profit as they can. And they're not the people that are going to like come in and save the world. And then another reason why we look at this is the last reason that we're going to share today, why we see this gas pipeline as a false solution, is because of the decision-making process that we have here in the state of Vermont. It's, basically the Public Service Board is the main decision maker in this case, and it's 3 older white men who sit on a board. They serve a term of 6 years. And it's a very technical and legal process that people can like apply to become interveners, and basically their lawyers would represent them in the case. It's a series of like questions and answers that they have some public hearings, but they don't legally have to like consider the public comment in their testimony. There's really no democratic way for just regular folks to get involved and have a say in the project. And so we see that as like a false solution because it's kind of like reinforcing these really non-democratic modes of
up this portion. I'd like us all to join in a visualization. So if you can harness your inner magic, the turning word, I'd like us to together sort of visualize the weather staying like this most of the weekend. Everybody turning your love towards the sky. I'd like us to see that pipeline of fracking gas that they want to send down into the middle of Vermont. We're seeing that being blocked. Come see Rising Tide talk about that. We're seeing a lot of people come to Solarfest this year, just the right amount, a full bunch of parking lots. And let's see fracking being blocked all over the world. The truth coming out. Let us see the beginning of the age of truth, where the big lies are no longer running the world, and where the truth about solar power and people power and community and organic food become the dominant way of the future, so that we can have a livable future together for thousands of years here on this earth. May it be so. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Solarfest.